Welcome back to the Producers Corner, where we dive deep into the minds of top producers to uncover their creative processes, production tricks, and industry insights. In this episode, we're joined by Erb N Dub, a veteran drum and bass producer, DJ, and sound innovator known for his high-energy 4-deck scratch performances and earth-shattering productions. With over 15 years in the game, chart-topping releases, and remixes for DJ Fresh, Foreign Beggars, 𝗙𝗂𝗍, and the Prototypes, his impact on the scene is undeniable. Today, we're going beyond the mix, exploring his journey as a producer, mastering techniques, and the process behind developing his own line of VST plugins. Whether you're looking to refine your sound or improve your mixdowns, this episode is packed with game-changing insights you don't want to miss. Check the links below to learn more about Erb N Dub's VST tools and sample packs. Trust me, they sound dirty. Also, if you want to support this channel directly, check out our line of sound packs at 𝗙𝗦𝗧𝗀𝗎𝗀𝗀 or down in the links in the description. Comment and let me know who else you'd like to see at the Producers Corner. Hit that like button, subscribe, let's get into it.
Be formless, shapeless.
We got Erb N Dub in the studio. What you been up to?
Well, I've been building a studio, new studio behind, a new 𝗙𝗂𝗧𝗀𝗏 studio. I've been making plugins, been doing shows, finishing singles, doing some radio shows as well. And yeah, just building up for the spring, really. It's just around the corner, not for you because you've got all the snow. Just been absolutely flat out. And then I went skiing for a couple of weeks as well. So yeah, it's been crazy, man. Building a new studio is insane. Like, I had my old studio in the countryside for like 10 years, and you don't realize how much equipment and how much stuff you've got. And then we took this place on. Like, there's many studios here. It's in Brighton. It's in the basement of a building. But it was just like an empty room. Even though this was a purpose-built studio, you know, it's offset and it's got a raised floor and things like that. And there's another room as well where we've got all our live stuff in and another setup. But you just don't realize how much stuff you've got and how much, even adding additional acoustics and redoing this entire room, how much time it takes. And yeah, it's just so much effort that's gone into it. But I'm literally pretty much finished today, just hiding all the leads away and everything. So it's pretty much good to go. So yeah, it's a great space.
It's looking great from what I can see on the background. And I'm wondering, what was the concept for the studio? Are you looking to do live recordings, or is it more of a production setup?
Really just to make music. Yeah, it's not really anything like, even though it's got great internet here, it's geared for everything, this whole building, but like, it's really just to make music, focus on the 𝗙𝗂𝗧𝗀𝗏 music. And obviously I work with other artists and do mixdowns and mastering and stuff, some bigger labels, and maybe develop some artists this year, we'll see. But yeah, it's more really for ourselves, myself, to write music in, really.
That's wicked. Tell me a little bit about 𝗙𝗂𝗧𝗀𝗏. What's that all about?
So 𝗙𝗂𝗧𝗀𝗏𝗀𝗏 is like, it's like, I was going to say it's live drum and bass, even though we do perform live drum and bass. It's more just dance floor drum and bass, club orientated, and we have a live version of it. So when we go and play festivals and some clubs, we can take the full live show. But really, it's just two musicians. Like, I grew up playing drums, and then you've got Phil, the other member. He's a grade 8 pianist, and we just fused really, and we work really well together. He's got a lot of experience in production and stuff like that, and obviously I have as well. So yeah, we've just written quite a lot of music. We signed recently to Viper. Previous to that, we was on Elevate. We've done some big remixes, some big singles, some big shows, and yeah, we're just sort of pushing the sound forward. We kind of had a little bit of a break when COVID hit, just because there was no real reason to make club orientated drum and bass, and we don't necessarily make radio drum and bass, you know, as in Spotify drum and bass. So we had a little break, but now we're back, and we've combined basically both of our studios, and that's where we're at now, and that's why we're in Brighton. So yeah,
I'm excited to hear that you're working on some dance floor ready drum and bass. I know you've have a wide breadth of work over the years.
Yeah, man, I've made a lot of drum and bass, whether it's, I started in Jump Up, and then some dance floor, and then at 𝗂𝗏 we did a lot of stuff, me, 𝗙𝗂𝗍𝗲 and 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗀𝗏. We did a lot of singles, remixes and stuff like that. But yeah, I've just, you know, I think it comes from coming, you know, from a live background and being into bands and stuff like that when I was younger. You have a lot more musical influences, and I wouldn't say skill, but You know, you can do a lot more things when you come from a live background. You're not just stuck with a mouse in your hand and a computer keyboard, MIDI keyboard, you know, making snare drums. You know, there's a lot more that you can offer.
I was reading over your repertoire, and it's a very impressive list. You've done work with people such as Fatboy Slim, Andy C, and Macky Gee, to name a few. What were your role in those works?
I'll start with Macky Gee. So Macky Gee, I used to run music courses. I wrote a music course, and with Harry Schotter, when we both finished university, we were in a band and we got offered a deal with Universal and things like that. That didn't come off, band split up, and we needed to earn some money. So I wrote a music course which was to help local kids in communities, which spread. And then we started working with like this thing called the Interreg projects, local councils and stuff, and it moved, some of our ideas moved into France, and you know, it got quite big. And then I started working for another company called the Beat Project, and they had like studios in a place called Sittingbourne in England, and there's just different students coming through, and I was teaching them music production and DJing, and Macky Gee appeared, but he was just a kid called Jack, and I got on really well with him, and we was always having like a laugh. I mean, I think he was like 17, 18, and when he turned 18, like I think he started to take his music a bit more seriously. But then I left the place, and I kind of stayed in contact with him with a thing called AIM back in the day. We used to send tunes to each other. And then he started hitting me up, and he was saying, look, I've just played in Belgium, you know, look at this show. And I was like, you know, you're starting to play bigger shows than me. And then the momentum kicked in. And then as he got older, obviously I'm a few years older than him, we become proper mates. And then he blew up, like with tour and things like that.
You talked about helping people out and seeing these artists start from their very humble beginnings and blowing up to these international superstars. It must be a rewarding feeling as someone that's passing on the knowledge and seeing them take that and flourishing and becoming something of their own.
It is crazy to see some amazing things, like, you know, people blow up and you've helped them along the way.
Yeah, if anything, it's inspirational, and it shows up-and-coming artists and people that are aspiring to become something, that it is possible.
Yeah, I mean, we all start from nothing. You know, it doesn't matter what background you have in the drum and bass hierarchy or trying to get somewhere in music. You start from nothing.
Yeah, you
know, everyone has a day one. I mean, the way I see music is, I don't care if it's a sample pack, a recording off of the TV, or if it's some $5,000 synth. If it sparks an idea which then helps you be creative and it can turn into your next tune, I don't care where it comes from. It could be literally anything. It could be dropping a coin on the floor that you've recorded. It doesn't bother me. So my process at the moment is whatever helps you get to the end result is great. I mean, sound design is something completely different to making music. People get this twisted, you know, so you have to really separate the two things. But it's whatever helps create your creative spark, basically. Whatever triggers you to make music is the most important thing. Unless you're not into making music. If you're into making sounds, that's something completely different. But yeah, whatever helps spark your creativity is most important to me, and I think a lot of other producers out there.
Yeah. What's your, I guess, a process in terms of getting inspiration and starting a new idea, for example?
It can kind of be what I just said, really. Like, whatever, it could be, you know, obviously I make a lot of sounds and I make a lot of sample packs and stuff like that, but it could be a new splice pack that's been released. It could be something I've heard on the television, or it could be a nice set of chords. It could be just a theme. You know, I want to make a tune like one of my old tunes. I want to make something that was a bit more punky, because one of my first bands, it was called UXB. I was like 15, 16, and I played in a proper, not like happy punk, like British punk, anarchic punk group. I was playing drums in it. So I ended, you know, sometimes you just want to throw back to different things. But yeah, that tune was called Punk Rock, and it was inspired by that thought process with guitars and stuff like that. So it really depends where your head's at, really. I mean, unfortunately, also you've got to kind of stay in a lane as well. What's kind of current at the time, or you can throw the rule book out the window as well. Do you know what I mean? And just make music that's just like a bit more crazy and a bit more out there. So yeah, I would say I don't have one type of inspiration. It could be a new plugin, could be a new sound, could be a new sample pack, could be something I've seen on the television, it could be a conversation I've had with someone, or it could be I've heard a new tune and I thought that was sick. I want to make something like it. So yeah, you take inspiration from everywhere, really.
Yeah, I'd fully agree with you. As a musician, we can take influence and inspiration from anything. It could be just anything in life that we may encounter, whether it's a sound from like a movie or just a life experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you a hardware or a software guy when it comes to making sounds?
I use hardware for a polish because it has a different sound to it, but mainly software. Like Serum and the Serum 2 come in as well, which I've been beta testing as well.
Yeah.
And that's my main synth.
Yeah.
Like Serum is sick.
I've heard some of your recent tracks, and the bass is really gritty. What's your process to getting your sounds nasty?
I mean, overall, it's about a good mix down and getting the most out of the sounds coming out of Serum beforehand. Like, okay, you can process like a sine wave and turn it into whatever you want with distortion, third-party plugins, or the plugins in your DAW. But if you can kind of achieve the most sonic sound you can out of just Serum, then you don't have to use so much additional processing. So with regards to hardware, if I was making sample packs and stuff, yes, I use hardware. It'd be mainly EQs. Sometimes I use distortion, things like 𝗙𝗘𝗧𝗙𝗏 or Black Box. But if you have any experience of using hardware, it rounds off transients. So you have to be quite careful with drum and bass because it makes things sound smoother and silkier, which can be really good. But also you can kind of, the digital side of things in production still has this sort of tough edge. So you need to know why you're using it, when to use it. There was a period where I was trying to do everything through hardware because it does sound better, but you realize that you will lose some of the aggression that you get from the digital side of things.
Any VSTs that you go to in terms of processing your bass, for example?
Well, there's OTT, which people love it or hate it. It's got such a powerful sound to it. There's, I think it's called, was it Devious Machines? They do like a multi-band compressor, which is very good. I can't remember what it's called. They've got Infiltrate or Infiltrator, something like that. But then they've got like this multi-band, which is amazing. There's the one by the people who made Current as well, and another multi-band, which is really good, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
Rift?
Yeah, Rift is good as well. Their multi-band distortion. Trash 2 is good. The new Trash. I like the original Trash 2 more, but the new Trash is really good as well. And a lot of Ableton stock plugins, you know, they're really good. You can get a lot out of them. There's a lot of analog modeling plugins which are quite good as well by 𝗙𝗘𝗧𝗏 if you want to add some sort of sheen and shines to stuff, and like the Pultex and things like that, EQs. But for sound design, really, I try and get the most of it out of the synth or the VST synth which I'm using. Try and design that to have the right frequency content, and then I don't have to process as much. But you always find more multi-band compression or something can give it a bit more of a smack, which is kind of what you need. If you end up making sounds which are just flatline, as in they have no punch to them in places, and you especially notice this in neuro, your tune will have no
dynamics
to it. And it's trying to get stuff that has movement and dynamics in it, and then you start to get these kind of weighty mixes, especially if you want to make things like, I don't know if you want to call it this new jump up sound where you've got like, you know, you've got so many producers now, but it needs to have some form of impact in the transients of the sounds, unless you're making jungle or something, which is just sort of flatline, sort of smooth sounds, basses, 808s or whatever. But if you want something that slaps on a system, you need to find a way of doing this, and I find multi-band compression can really give you that. Distortion's pretty obvious, but you know, we need to add distortion or saturation.
Yeah,
but yeah.
That's interesting. So it sounds like multi-band distortion or multi-band processing seems to be important in your process.
Very useful. I mean, EQ is important as well, obviously. Like, I've been through every EQ that you could probably imagine, and I've just gone back to the Pro Q4 now, or 3, 4, it doesn't matter. But EQ, I think really of the thousands of plugins I've bought or been sent, I don't need 99% of them, which sounds crazy, for sound design and even mixing.
I agree with you. I've always went by the philosophy of less is more, and and slimming down your tool set too. A couple that you know intimately that you can use very well, right? And like you say, it's all about getting your source material, like you say with Serum, to sound really good. Because if your source material doesn't sound as good, then you have less to work with.
Yeah, I mean, understanding all your tools is really important. Understanding what different types of distortion there are, what types of compressors they are. I mean, for sound design, when I say about multi-band compression and stuff like that, it's really just to make things slap. Compressors overall aren't necessarily needed in drum and bass. Like, you don't need to compress a snare. You know, if you've got your tune running, there's lots of old school mixing techniques which have kind of bled into drum and bass because of YouTube and things like that, where really 99% of them are irrelevant. They don't need to be put into drum and bass. I think there was a 𝗏𝗏𝗡 thing when he was interview when he was saying, why would you put an SSL bus compressor on a snare drum? Like, you don't need to. You know, there's a technique to getting things loud. And again, there's three different things really. There's sound design, there's mixdowns, and there's making music. Making music should be the most important thing. You could pay people like me to mix down your music if you haven't got time. But if you can make great music, then happy days. Then mixdowns are important, and then obviously sound design is kind of the last thing that I think you should learn if you wanna, because right now there's so many tools out there that already make good sounds. You can buy great presets, like you've got a preset pack called Gnarly, and you were saying, you know, a lot of people have used it in tunes and stuff like that. You've got Splice, or you've got whatever other, you know, even on my website I sell samples and preset packs. There's so much out there that why do you really need to become great at sound design first? You need to focus on your music. Also, AI is coming, so sound design is going to go out the window. I mean, AI is here, but at some point AI, you'll just be like, make me this, and it'll do it. So it's really about being creative first. Don't get me wrong, sound design is fun, but that is kind of the last part of it for me that I think people should learn right now.
I fully agree with you. In the end of the day, we're making music. We're not making sound, right? So you got to, the important skill is to learn how to make what makes a good song good, right?
Yeah, we get that in 𝗙𝗂𝗋𝗋 because I work with a very skilled pianist, and I can say, okay, we need a chord progression, and he would know theoretically in his head why we would have this chord progression and then an inversion of it and what this would achieve, and you know, and then I'm like, well, I like that, but I don't like that, and he's like, okay, well, let's try this with this here then, you know. And it's really about just focusing on the music and having your skill set so you understand like chords and notation and everything else, and why you're doing things, you know, is really important when you're trying to write music. Even in drum and bass, like even when it comes down to things like, it does bleed into sound design, like your fundamentals and your harmonics and where they register in the frequency or in a scale. And you know, it's great to have like more musical knowledge than not. You can get away with no musical knowledge, but you can only get so far, you know.
Yeah, I
if
agree.
I go back to Macky Gee though, he has no musical knowledge, but he's one of the most talented people I've ever worked with at writing melodies and chords and keys. He's just gifted, you know, at doing it without any musical training, musical theory.
Have you seen him work in the studio? Like, have you seen his actual process?
Yeah, I mean, I helped him build his recent studio in his house, in his basement, and we've just got a collab finished that's going to come out this year as well, 𝗙𝗂𝗋𝗋 and Macky Gee. And he's fucking crazy, man. Like, his desktop is a mess, his computer's a mess, everything's just everywhere. Like, my computer, I know where every single file is. Like, it has to be like that, otherwise my brain can't handle it. But he's just like, he'll write a melody and I'm like, that's sick, and then he'd delete it. Write another melody, I'm like, that's sick, he'd delete it, and he'd keep going because he knows where he's trying to get to. And like, he'd write 20 different melodies and then he'd be like, that's the one. And I'm like, well, all 20 of them were great. Do you know what I mean? He's just so fast and so, yeah, that's not good. And like, you know, it's just, he doesn't procrastinate on anything. Just like bang, 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 you know. And it comes across in his tunes, whether people love or hate them, like, they're just so, like, there it is, right in your face.
He's got really strong hooks.
Yeah, he's just what he's good at. He really is good at it. He's great at production as well, don't get me wrong. His sound, he created his own sound, you know. And sometimes I see he gets backlash, but it's his own sound. How many producers start to sound the same? There's no one who sounds like Macky Gee.
Yeah,
Apart from half the drum and bass scene, well, all of the drum and bass scene, all of a sudden started breaking really melodic bass lines after tour, you know.
Yeah, I think he was one of the first that did that kind of very melodic, upfront, jump up bass line.
At that time, he put the melody back into drum and bass.
All right, so I heard you got some sick VSTs in the works. I know they're on your store right now. There's the Re-Space, there's jump up bass and hardware bass. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your tools and the concept behind them?
Yeah, so let me load them up so you can see them straight away. So hardware bass looks like this. So it's a Rompler, and then Re-Space. They all look very similar, but they have different sounds in them. So Re-Space, and then you've got jump up bass, which is the most recent one, and which is that one. So let me just start with the concept behind it and just keep one of them open. So hardware bass was the first one. So I wanted to make a VST that cut out all the sort of processing and stuff like that. So the sounds of like have got full sonic weight. They're ready to use. Using my sort of tailor-made processing techniques with hardware and software, designing the sounds from the sort of ground up, and then putting them in like a skin, which is a Rompler. So if you don't know what a Rompler is, it's like sample based, so you can then play your sounds via the VST. So I've put different parameters on it, like gain, reverb, delay, time, phaser, chorus, and you've got some filtering, ADSR and stuff like that, pitch bend and so on. But it's full of like over 200 fat sounds. Like I've really gone in, made sure that everything's just as pristine as it can be. Everything's at zero, so you can just really just use it as a writing tool. It's not a creative tool where you can sit and make your own sounds. Yes, you can process them, you can refilter them and stuff like that. Use third-party plugins and reprocess them. But this is about having amazing sounds from the get-go, you know, and I use this in my music all the time. I really sort of made it for myself, and then I was like, hold on, I think other people will be interested in this. I mean, you've used it. What do you think?
Yeah, I've played around with it, and I love how gritty and dirty some of these bass sound, and I like that, like you say, they're ready to go, and you could just slap them on a track and they sound good. And I heard you have a very special processing to get them the way you did. Apparently you put them through tons of expensive gear.
Yeah, I mean, I made them from the ground up with different types of synthesis, and then process them with inside the DAW, whether it's Ableton or Cubase or Logic, it doesn't matter. Then I've got them to a level where I'm like, right, these sounds are sick. How can I make them sound even better, and how can they be like sort of unattainable to a lot of people? So I used a lot of mastering grade hardware, whether it's the high def 55 EQ, the black box, 𝗙𝗂𝗯𝗀. I used some different preamps, 1073s, massive passive hardware EQ, like just to give it that sort of polished extra sound that you can't just achieve with digital plugins.
I love that. So essentially, if people access this tool, they can get this sound that you can't get anywhere else unless you invest in 20,000 pounds of processing gear.
Yeah, analog hardware just gives you a complete different sort of sheen to it. Not a complete different sound, but it gives you more of a expensive, polished sound that, yeah, you just plugins just can't achieve it. They just haven't got the same sort of silk to them, unfortunately. So, yeah, so hardware does have a massive sort of part of the hardware base and then the other plugins as well. So yeah, it's evident when you kind of like hear the sounds of them. So I think this plugin for myself, I use it all the time when I'm sketching ideas, writing tunes, and even if I need like turnarounds and stuff like that, I know which sounds I can go to. But there's so many cool sounds in there that I've kind of just gone in and done all the hard work so everyone else doesn't have to.
Any big artists that we might know that have used your tools?
Yeah, I mean, Sigma have used it in some of their tunes. Boo bought 2 of them I saw from our website. Andy C hit me up for a couple of copies. Macky Gee, Molly Collins, but I don't know beyond that. It's only people that I chat to, but I'm sure there's plenty of other artists which have used these or using them in their music because they're such great tools. They're so good for writing music.
That's wicked. And I love that. It really, like we've spoken about before, is that you don't need to be a sound designer today. If you just want to focus on writing good music, you can leverage tools such as yours and just get right into working on a good idea. I'm curious, why don't you show us some of the sounds that this thing could produce?
Yeah, so I've loaded some drums into Ableton, just a loop that I made, and then there's no sidechain or anything. So the first preset is called Bad Boy, and you've just got one long note and then a note octave higher, so you can just hear the sort of sonics. And we can just scroll through. So this is really good, like it's called Dimension. You wanted to make that kind of dance floor sort of spot. Kind of like the layer that everyone's looking for. The mad reaches. There's so many. I mean, if we just look at this, if anyone's into production, if you look at it with no side chaining and put like just a limiter on the master bus, just so we can see mainly the LUFS, the LUFS, see how loud it is. So we're already hitting with that sound just with those drums around -5 LUFS, which is, I'd say, -4 is a good sort of loudness to have drum and bass. So without even doing anything, we've kind of got these big sonic sounds already, and we're not even making music yet. We just literally got 2 long notes. So they're just ready to go. I mean, and it's not only just bass sounds, there's drums in it. If you scroll further down, there's like pads, leads, all sorts of stuff in it. And there's even like little one shots and stuff. Like there's a sound I made for one of Friction's tunes. I helped him. So I ended up then taking that and processing it, putting that in it. Some neuro, then loads of Reese's in this one as well. And then you got lead sounds.
I love how gritty these sound.
Yeah, they're gritty, but they're also usable. They're not overcooked. They've got nice transients to them. They've got nice punch to them. They're not just maxed out sounds. Even though they're super loud and supersonic, they still have the dynamics in them. They still have the punch in them, which you really need to make good music. I mean, if I show you some of the other ones, you've got, what's the next one I made? No, that's the drum, sorry. It's this one here, Reese bass. So this, I wanted to focus more about Reese's, and the reason I wanted to use it more in this sort of rompler style is because if you're designing sounds and you add an EQ point to your sound or whatever, as the notes change, you're gonna, that EQ point, say if you boosted 200 or something hertz, yeah, when it goes to another note, that boost is it's not gonna go with the notations. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's better for sound design if you imprint all your EQ and distortion, everything onto the sound and then resample it. You get what I'm saying?
I know
Otherwise,
exactly what you mean. You don't have to adjust the EQ for each note because you've printed it onto the sample.
Exactly. Yeah. So now this is going to sound equally as good as, and this is the sound of drum and bass. There's a lot what people forget, especially when they're making tunes. If you've got sound just coming out of Serum and you've put processing on it and EQ and everything else, when you go to another note, that EQ processing doesn't follow it, but this way it does, imprinted into the sound. Make sure there's like some decent stereo, there's the right grit. So this has got.
Is every note recorded individually? Like, is there?
Yeah, but some of them speed up, and then it's done like that on purpose, so you get the traditional kind of, and then you get the. You know, you can add filtering and stuff like that, like a high pass. You know, you've got your chorus, phaser, some delays, even a bit of gain now. Bring that down. You know, remember we've only got 2 notes here, so if you start going and adding, you know, different notes, notation, you can get some really crazy stuff like. That was designed so it's more like with like old school EMU samplers in mind. You used to have like a unison spread and stuff like that. And what was the filter on it as well? So it's like some of this is like throwback to stuff that you can only make by doing certain methods and then resampling it and housing it within something like this VST. So let's check more current sounds. AMC. So it sounded like an AMC kind of sound, Prodigy-ish. I mean, that'd be good for an intro or sick day. That's really gritty. And it goes on and on and on. There's so many sounds in here. I haven't put any fillers in either. I just made sure everything's like, everyone's a winner. So when I'm making music, I've got stuff to go to. So there's something like weird. See that note's a bit too high on this one. So there's like really twisted, and you know, they speed up as well. So you kind of get all these like crazy, all over the place things, mad stabs.
I like
you
that
know,
one.
just remember it's just about getting it like when I was designing them to get the sonics right. You know, there's different drums in it. Kick drums that are nice and fat and you can repick them. The tuning drums is very important. People overlook it. Sound effects, who knows? And then to key. And then the final VST I made was Jump Up bass, and this I made because I wanted it to sound so those first two tools were like really useful tools overall for making drum and bass music, and this one's more specific to what's current in drum and bass at the moment and will be for the next year or two. So that's an octave too high here. You get these really gritty current drum and bass sounds that are super sonic as well. Like when you're designing sounds as well, you've got to make sure you've got the right frequency balance, you've got enough sub in it and enough mid-range and enough tops. It's quite easy to create a sound that sounds really good on the ear, but then when you put it in your DAW, it might be missing a sub bass or whatever. You know, that's the real key, is to getting the overall balance and having still punch to it and so on like that, which a lot of these sounds or all of these sounds have or should have. I mean, these are, you put a bit of verb on them, there's some pretty crazy sounds. And I could go on, but you can hear, like, overall, if you bought all three of these, and I'll probably do like a discount for you as well, so your viewers could get like input a discount code in them and get them for a lot cheaper. But there's over 600 and something processed sounds. You know, each one's been meticulously made and then processed or finalized with hardware or designed with hardware from the start. You know, whether it's a 𝗙𝗘 or a black box or an EQ or something in there. So they're almost bespoke sounds, and it's great for me when I hear these sounds in top tier music. You know, like it wasn't used. One of these synths wasn't used, but the Macky Gee and 𝗙𝗢𝗋𝗄𝗧 tune Disconnect was a preset of mine that they bought off of my website. And it's used in, you know, I was on holiday and it went top 10, I think, in England in the national chart. And I was like, that's my bass sound. And, you know, I've been hearing lots of tunes with these bass sounds in from these VSTs and stuff. So to me, I love it. I think it's amazing when I get to hear my sounds being used in other people's music. And also, I can use these sounds in my own music as well. They're really useful, grab, don't have to worry about processing, write a tune with sounds. So I'm really, you know, really happy I made them for my own music.
Yeah, it sounds like you put a lot of thought into creating these tools. I love that each one of these VSTs are packed with tons of different sounds. They all sound really pristine and ready to go. And once again, if users don't have that know-how to get the sounding up front. You've done all that legwork for them, processing it with hardware, putting it through your personal processing techniques to get them sounding the way they are, so people can just focus on writing music and just focus on using the sounds as they are and put it in their music. And I love that, because now with tools such as yours, producers and aspiring producers can just focus on writing good music. So if people want to learn more about these tools, you can find more down in the links below. He's got 3 of them: jump up bass, Reese bass, and hardware bass. Like Erb N Dub has said, we might even provide you guys with a special promotional discount or offer so you guys can access these tools. And you can check it out all at his website, and you'll find it down below. So the current sound of drum and bass, I've noticed, is super loud and also super clear. And I'm kind of on a personal journey to learn how each producer gets their final results so loud, yet without sacrificing the clarity, without sacrificing the transients. Some of the tracks I'm referencing are such as the latest 𝗙𝗂𝗧𝗲 album, super loud, almost going over 2 dB over true peak, but still it sounds super clear. So I'm wondering, what is your personal process to getting your tracks sounding loud and clear?
Right, so it's quite simple actually. It's leaving everything at 0. Yeah, people think, why would you do that? Think of this process, right? You want to achieve 0 decibels, yeah? 0 is the end of your door. You can't go any louder than 0. Even though it might look like it is, it clips it off. So you just got 0 dBs, your final output when you export a song. So if you want to get it to 0, why would you turn everything down and then bring everything up and then put a limiter on it or whatever like that just to make it loud? So if you start at 0 and then work backwards. So for instance, if you get your kick to 0, and you can do that by putting a clipper on it. I don't know if I've got a clipper on it here. Let's see if I can find a kick drum somewhere later on in the record. You can put a clipper on it and bring it up to level if you need to. This is where you have to use your ears, and a good, here we go, a good studio or a good set of monitors or a good pair of headphones is important. So I think on here I've used a limiter just to bring this up to 0, even though I've made the sound already. Just make sure it's hitting at 0, and then I've put some other processes on it. But then I do the same with my snare drum. I would bring my snare up to 0 and so on. So my basses, I'd be running them into clippers. And what I mean by a clipper is that there's one here. This is called flatline. Bring this up. And this dial here, once I've moved this, it will chop off some of the transients. So I'm just getting more out of each of the sounds, which makes them appear louder, but it's not actually getting any louder. It's just chopping unwanted spikes off and bringing the body up. So you think, okay, that's louder. It's not. It's not in decibels. So essentially just little nudges of every sound, bringing them closer to 0, and then I work on my master bus. I also had side chaining. Does that make sense to you? You following what I'm saying?
So that's very interesting. So what you're doing is with each individual layer, let's say the kick, the snare, you're adding either a limiter or a clipper to get them to 0 or clipping to 0, so they're super loud.
Yeah, they're super loud on the ear, and the samples which I've made would already be at 0 anyway. So I'm just using my ear just to get more out of them. Okay, I might add some additional processing, but I'd always put a clipper as the last thing, so it never goes above 0. So all of my channels are literally sitting around 0. And if I want to get them to sound bigger or better, instead of turning things up in volume, I would just put an EQ before it, an EQ into a clipper. So I've kind of got this lid on every sound. Yeah, so it sounds a bit like, why would you want to do that? But it gives me full control on the mix. Now on the master bus, this is Cubase, by the way. I work a lot in Ableton. It could be Fruity Loops or whatever. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. So here's the master bus fader. So I've got a lot of plugins on here, and if I bypass them all and then listen to the drop, I think there's a quicker way of doing it actually, sorry. Bypass them all and listen to the drop. It may be distorted. It'd definitely be going into the red, or it might sound okay. So it's a bit pushed, a little bit pushed, but if I put some form of measurement on it, I think we actually have positive lufs there. It went above 0, so it's insanely loud.
Yeah.
Because everything's just been brought up to level. Okay, it's a bit pushed, a bit distorted, but you could kind of get away with playing that out. Listen to it on MacBook speakers. However, so to fix this, fix the fact that I've got everything up to 0, I could just put a gain tool on here. This is just one by kilohertz, and I've just turned it down by ear. So I could say maybe around 10 is a good rule of thumb.
Right. As
you can see, there's no precision there because it says 0.49. I've just turned it down to allow myself some headroom.
Okay, that makes sense.
Rather than going and turning down all your individual channels, that's just crazy. Like,
yeah, because you want those original channels to be hitting 0. So why would you be adjusting it? So instead, you're compensating that by going into the mastering bus and just adding I guess this gain tool to bring the gain of the master down.
Yeah, the way DAWs are designed, and people should really learn this from the start, is they have infinite headroom inside the mixer window. Just think of not the master bus, that's over here. Even though it's showing you sometimes you're going into the red, that's not going to affect the sound because they have this thing called 64-bit flow. So you have this infinite headroom. It's just a guide. It's a bit like the Pioneer DJM mixers. There's a function on it where you can press a button and it gives you another 18 decibels of headroom. And people are like, you're going into the red, but you don't realize there's already another 18 decibels of headroom beyond the red. So it's a bit like that in Cubase or in Ableton or in Fruity Loops or in Logic. It's just to guide your mixer. You have to be aware of redlining plugins or going in too hard into plugins, some plugins, like analog modeling things, but things like FabFilter Pro Q3 or 4 EQs, they have this infinite headroom, so you can get your EQ and boost it 20 decibels if you want. So that's one side of it. You can kind of abuse your DAW. Your master bus has as a limit. You can't go above 0. Even though the output was showing us earlier on that it's going above 0, my DAW is adding a clipper. They put clippers in them because before they did that, it used to like pop and click. It used to sound terrible. So it clips off the tops of the sound just to protect your equipment, your ears and everything like that. So once you've got your head around that, you can use it to your advantage. So I'm going into it. I used to make tunes, and I know some producers who are big still do, and I think it was Turno that I heard, and even Serum. They just clip their DAW. They don't care on their master bus. It goes into the red, and their DAW clips it off. However, you can use clipping tools like standard clip, flatline, and everything like that. So to give myself some headroom, I put a gain tool on it, which just allowed me to have 13 whatever decibels of headroom. Then I can then work with it. So let's look at the rest of the mastering bus chain, and we can go from there. And every time I master a tune, it's slightly different EQs, different processes. It's, mastering is almost like making a tune. You kind of really got to think, what do I need to get to the next step? And it's little small increments to get there. Don't get me wrong, everything is all about your mix down. If you can get your mix down right, your sound sounding right, your EQ and everything, your balance right, that's where the real key is. If you don't get that the best it can be, then no matter what the mastering does, it's never going to improve it. Okay? You following me?
That makes sense, man.
Okay, cool. So we got a gain tool, then I've got an EQ. This I would have just done by ear. I wouldn't normally do these cuts, but for some reason I did. These are quite harsh and they can cause things like phase issues and stuff like that if you don't know what you're doing, but I kind of did it for a reason, I should imagine. So let's put that back on. So Neutron 5, which is by iZotope, you can use, they call it AI, but I'm not into all this AI stuff. People just throw around the term AI too much. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But it essentially analyzes your music and it brings up a selection of different curves with EQ and compression settings and saturation, and that he thinks that you could use to improve it. Now this is made for more like single instruments or buses, but I used it on the master bus. TV showed me it, and he was like, look, it can give you some EQ examples because it's just trying to fill out the frequency spectrum and the places where certain things are missing. So it would load up lots of things across the top, and I've removed all of them because I didn't need them, compression and stuff like that. But I was like, does this EQ fill out my frequency range? And it did, so I kept it. So it just gave me an EQ pointer. Yeah. Now that was Neutron 5. There's Neutron 4 on here doing something else. So don't ask me why, but I've kept this sculpting side of things, and the EQ's bypassed, so I'm not using it. So this sculpting, really keeping hold of the frequency balance. You know, if you really want to get into EQing and understanding the nature of sound, look into the Fletcher-Munson curve or pink noise, and that's how we hear. And I'm not going to give you a lesson on hearing, but we don't hear in a flat line. So just look at the way pink noise is, and that's the way we hear. You know, we don't hear flat. We can't hear bass, so it has to be exaggerated, and the super highs have to be a lot duller. So the line goes in an angle like that. So this plugin here, this sculptor, is trying to real time create more of a Fletcher-Munson curve. All right.
All right.
So what's next? So here we have a Massillek emulation EQ. So a Massillek EQ is a traditional mastering EQ, and they've done a fantastic job with this relab. They sent me a copy of it, and to be fair, I love it. It's great. It's very hard to replicate the sound of analog, and there's hardly any plugins that have done a good job of it. UAD have done a couple of plugins which I think are very good. Acoustica have done a couple, and this is a great emulation of a Massillek. So it looks very confusing, but it's not really. These are your bell shapes up at the top. These are your individual bands. So you've got your frequency and then the amount of gain, and then you change the bell shape. I hope that makes sense. But if you want to learn more about this EQ, you could Google it or whatever. But it's really, I've used it to enhance some of the top end. You can see here it says 9K, and I've given it a 1.5 decibel boost. So with this
very
Cubase,
subtle, very subtle.
Yeah, I mean, if this is, hold on, this is the same equivalent type of boost in Cubase, and if you imagine you did that in Ableton with the Ableton EQ or whatever, it doesn't look like you're doing anything. But you have to be aware that mastering is many subtle movements, and again, you have to have good monitoring in a good room. So that is doing a couple of other things. I've boosted 0.5 at 1K and stuff like that to give it just more presence. So imaging is important, but really I've just monoed the low end of this using this 𝗖𝗛𝗘𝗦 11 or something, or is it 10? I can't remember. This one's 10, so but there's version 11 now. So I just wanted to mono the information in the lows because it translates better in clubs and on some speakers and stuff like that. I wouldn't normally or always do this because, believe it or not, stereo information is actually quite good in low end, or it can be quite good in low end, especially with things like trap and stuff like that. Having like quite wide stereo in your low end can sound really good. There is a de-esser on this, and this is essentially, it takes a while to load. It's just a bit of a glitch with the software. It's by Vice, and this was originally a piece of hardware, and they've just recreated it in software because it was a digital piece of hardware, and it de-esses, and it's good for mastering. And what I mean by de-essing, it controls some of the frequencies, like compresses them, so you can take some of the harshness out. So even though I've put some back in with the Massillek EQ, I've de-essing a bit with this EQ because digital plugins, even if they're emulations, aren't as forgiving as real hardware, like you can see down here or whatever. It's just still has a digital sound to it, so I try and smooth them off a bit. Using things like Soothe on the master bus I find too drastic. It just, even no matter how much I tweak it, it just feels like it's a bit of an overkill. Now this is another EQ. This is called a Sontec EQ, and each analog EQ has a slightly different flavor to it, and I wanted a bit more top end, believe it or not, because I de-essed it, and I wanted to sort of an extra sound. This Sontec is quite an expensive EQ. I think it's about £400, I think, but it has the actual hardware units. I'm going to make it up. I think it's around 20 grand or something like that. So £400 or 20 grand, you know. I put it on this, use it to boost some tops. Like here you've got your high shelf and low shelf, so it looks a bit strange, this EQ, like all plugins do when you first open them. You can't get your head around them, but then you've got your low band, and it's pretty similar to the Massillek, and then you've got your bell shapes here. So I've done a boost in the tops, a boost in the lows, quite a big boost at 1K, The reason 1K to 4K I would boost would give it more, it cut through the speakers more because our hearing's more sensitive around them frequencies. So all of this is done to taste, remember. This is like a process in my head where I was like, okay, these small steps, and what do I want to add next? What little bit of flavor next? Don't get me wrong, like you could just use ozone if you wanted to, but this is more specific because I've done a lot of mastering and mixing and stuff like that. I found the tools that I like, and they might not make it onto another master. I probably wouldn't have these two analog modeling EQs. So the Pro MB I've put on this, and it's just like a preset I've made, which it kind of actually adds more life to the record on the master. I don't know if you can hear it, but let's play it with it on. On my MacBook speakers, I can't hear shit. I can't hear anything. But on my monitors, I could hear a massive difference. And the way it's set up is it kind of compresses, but lets the transients come through. So it's a bit like a kind of a transient shaper. I mean, it's not a very drastic setting, but it adds a bit more body to this. So there's another track I've done where it's used heavily. It's just allowing some of the say the body of the snare to come through and thump, and then it compresses down like around this region. Or if I wanted some of the mid-range, and you can kind of reshape your mix tonally but also dynamically, so you can kind of add some smack back in regions, whereas if you use like a multiband transient shaper, it can be a lot more drastic, and you can find that it can pump and pull in the wrong places, like on breakdowns and stuff like that. So this is a good little preset I've made, which isn't actually doing too much on this, but it's
so
actually...
I can see the attack settings. Are they a bit slower to allow the transients to pass through?
Exactly that. Exactly that. They'd all be pretty similar. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, it allows me to put some dynamic snapback in it if you want to make up a new phrase.
Yeah.
So, and then for some reason, I've gone and put another imager on it. So really, the other one shouldn't be on it. The other imager was on it because I've done the similar sort of move, but I've obviously forgotten that the other imager's on it. Whatever, as long as it sounds good, I don't care. So it's actually increasing some of the stereo information. I find if I boost too much of the stereo above 6K, it starts to become too bright for me, because you have to think about things like stereo imagers or wideners. They use EQ kind of to create this width. So if you're boosting, say, over, in this last band here from 6K to 20K or whatever, you are essentially adding a bit of EQ as well. So you can make a tune sound super bright. It can sound white, but you're also changing the frequency spectrum as well, because you're boosting like a band of frequencies and pushing them out. So yeah, try not to do too much in the tops unless it needs it. Then I've added another de-esser, which is not uncommon because I'm going through stages and I'm using my hearing, and I'm like, right, I need to calm down the tops, because these analog modeling EQs add a bit of character, add a bit of saturation and stuff like that, which I liked. But then I was like, okay, it's still a bit bright and they are digital, so blah, blah, blah.
So I find that very interesting, actually. So normally de-essers are used for vocals, but in your case, you're using it to tame some of those harsh frequencies on the master.
Yeah, if you go into real mastering studios, de-essing, there's always de-essers in studios, but there'll be reasons for, sometimes you need to get the sound of an EQ, or you need to brighten something up. But you need to dull it down again. So you can't do that with EQ. You can't put a big boost of EQ and then a takeaway of an EQ, because there's no point. So you need something that's a bit more dynamic with a bit of movement in it. And also for cutting records back in the day and stuff, they would need to have some control of the tops and stuff like that. But yeah, de-essers are a really important part of mastering, and people don't realize you can use multi-band, EQ or multi-band compression, but I'd rather use something that's specifically made for it. So the next thing on the screen is a clip. So we've kind of in drum and bass gone away from limiters, even though you can get good results with them. It's just working into clippers, so we're shaving off unwanted transients, unwanted peaks, stuff like that. But this is by 𝗗𝗂𝗧𝗏, and I've been through every type of clipper there is. My favorite for working on individual elements is Flatline by Submission Audio, which I called up earlier. I don't like the sound of standard clip, and I don't like the sound of K clip. I think they sound pretty bad, to be fair, in comparison to these two. This one on the screen is where clipping really originated from, and let me explain very quickly because I don't want to bore anyone. So to clip back in the day, I never done it because I started in the door like most of you guys. You used to have a clip to tape, so you'd have a reel-to-reel machine and they'd run it hot, and it wouldn't necessarily clip it, but it'd warm things up. And then when it went digital with like things like Pro Tools and stuff like that, mastering engineers and mix engineers found that they could clip the input of their sound card, and it would essentially chop off stuff off of it, off of the sound. So say if you had a bass sound and you plugged the bass guitar, for instance, or anything, any sound, plugged it into a sound card, as in your main box, you know, A to D, D to A, whatever, plugged something into it and run it hot. So the red lights were saying you're driving this sound card too much. But if it sounded good, it would, you know, naturally clip off the tops because that's all it could do. So internally, it would cut off some of the sound. Following me?
Hell yeah.
Then they figured out, mastering engineers, that every bit of equipment had different sounds. So in my studio at the moment, I've got an Apogee Symphony Mark II, which has very good preamps in it, and it has a certain sound when I run it too hot with an input. So if I'm mastering with hardware in my studio, I go out of the output, through a load of analog gear, twiddle some knobs, and if I want to get it super loud, I can clip the input of my sound card, and it has a sound to it. Now, mastering engineers over time, over the last 10, 15 years, have realized that different sound cards have different clip sounds to them. So this plugin emulates the sound, it sounds crazy, and emulates the sound of different sound cards getting clipped. Yeah.
That's crazy.
And the most used, and everyone realized, I think it's called Lavry, and it's yellow or gold like this, gold. And they're about £8,000, I think, now. They were more expensive, but things have gone up, things have gone down. You know, food's gone up.
Yeah.
Good gear's gone down.
What's this one called?
This is Ash by Acoustic.
Okay.
And they do different skins, so you can have this version, or you can have another version where you can actually see what it's doing and stuff like that. But you can pull up, it's got mode here, all these different types of clips out, like clippers, which the Platinum maker I know is the Better maker clipper.
Yeah. You
know, you can buy the hardware. So if you get into hardware, then you would know what some of these are, but they never tell you exactly what they are because of copyright, I think.
So these are all different algorithms based on, I guess, different sound card clipping.
Yeah, and the advantage of Acoustica is they sample the actual sound of the unit using convolution. So you're actually getting the sound of analog within reason via impulse responses. It's so boring. But it does as a massive benefit. I mean, this is the best sounding clipper most of the time on the music which I master, unless I want to use the actual clip of the clipping of my real sound card. Yeah, it sounds great. It has a harmonic warmth to it that other clippers don't seem to have. It adds a bit more bottom end, and it has a sound to it, and you can push things really loud. So it's a mastering grade digital clipper. And then just to finish it off, I used a Pro-L, which is only there to catch some peaks, and I probably used it for the LUFS, so I could just see it there.
Okay,
so
that's really interesting. So you have Pro-L delimiter, but it's not really, from what I can see, the gain is 0, so it's not really doing me anything. I guess it's only to control the output, which is set to negative
I don't like
0.02.
The true peak of this limiter.
So you leave true peak off.
Yeah, I find the sound of it becomes a bit degraded, and I find you lose some loudness. I don't care about true peak enough, unless mastering for a certain purpose. If I for instance, I did like a jazz album recently for a very talented singer called 𝗙𝗂𝗍𝗂, and everything is by the book because I'm not trying to achieve super loudness. You know, true peaks on, oversampling's on, everything that you think you should do. Then I would apply it. I was only going for between, minus 12 lufs, or even maybe it was like super quiet. So I tried to keep everything super high quality. Whereas drum and bass, we're trying to break all the rules and we're trying to achieve different things. So yeah, oversampling's on here on this at the moment. Down here I can see it's like 16 times, but I wouldn't normally even put that on. I don't care enough. But if I play this record now and we look at the LUFS and see what we're getting, nothing is out of control, and none of this is by fluke. So this has all been mixed. You can see we're hitting between 3 and 2 LUFS, which is super loud.
That's super loud, but it still sounds really dynamic and punchy. And I also want to let the audience know that you guys are listening through a recording and a Zoom recording, so you may not get the full impact, but it's more about understanding the technique Erb N Dub is using here.
Yeah, I mean, all of this seems a bit extravagant, and you think, well, I could just do all of this with stock plugins or whatever, and yes, you can, but these you're never going to achieve as kind of the sort of extra 5% of something that this is giving you, and that's what separates being ultra professional and having like a good tune. Yeah, you can churn out tunes, that's fine. There's a marketplace for rough sounding tunes, that's great. But if I'm working with artists or on my own music, I want it to be the best I can get it. So these tools come into play and these techniques come into play. And when you listen to this tune and you say it's still got punch and snap and stuff to it, it's because the detail in the transients and the amount of clipping that it's been done and the sound design of a lot of the transients, a lot of the sounds in the mixdown has been really focused on. So the mastering is literally not as important as it seems. It's just adding a bit more clarity, fixing some errors if there are any errors, and making it loud. And making things loud is not the hard part anymore. It took me a while to figure out if I just left everything at 0 and worked backwards, it's the best method. And it really goes back to when I first started making music. We didn't know what we was doing, so we would just literally, everything would be in the red, and then the tunes would get signed. They would go off in the raves, and they still sounded sick. And then, say 10 years after that, I learned how to do limiting, this, that, and the other. And then I was like, why don't my tunes sound as good? And then 10 years after that, I realized I had to clip stuff like I was doing by accident when I first started and bring everything up and so on like that. So it's kind of gone full circle. But now I have an understanding of why I'm doing it and when to do it and how to do it and so on, That's
really interesting. And so it's almost like intuitively we know what's the right thing to do. It just sounds good and we should trust that. And it's funny how later down the road you learn other techniques and for some reason didn't sound as good anymore, and now it's full circle. Now you're back to that original position you were in, except now you have more knowledge into why it sounded so good to begin with.
I mean, yeah, you have to, like, there's a lot of stuff on the internet that's like great information, especially YouTube, and there's a lot of information that's relevant but not relevant. So a lot of the traditional mixing tools and techniques, okay, if we're recording vocals and stuff, that's slightly different because that's more in the analog world. We need to sort of control them with compression and understand that. But if we're making drum and bass and we've got samples, or you don't need to use a lot of these techniques. You should really strip back what you're doing. I mean, if we looked at this project, okay, then let me just close this, or at least get it out of the way. There's probably, I don't know how many channels in it. These are folders, so it's just an easy way of me to navigate it. But let's look down at the bottom. So there's 173 channels in this track, in this song, even though it doesn't look like it, to make this. And a lot of it's been rendered. But it shouldn't be like mad processing, because a lot of the sounds, like I'm looking at this box here, and that's where my plugins are. And okay, the kicks and snares I always have to work with to get them to sound right, but a lot of these sounds don't have much processing on them. Not loads, you'd expect lots more to get it up to level. I'm just looking, every time you see a blue thing over here, That's a plugin. And
Yeah.
what's this? Okay, that is some drastic EQ, but that's automated, so that's obviously a filter.
Yeah.
So that's nothing major. But yeah, and really the synth design in it, there's like 10 serums, and one of them would be a sub, you know. So it's not as complicated, even though it looks complicated because it's a strange looking door if you've never used Cubase. It's not as complicated as you think, maybe.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to it, it's just what sounds good. And I find it really affirming because hearing someone like yourself go through that journey, and I've always doing videos and streams, people would complain about, why are you redlining? Why is it always in the red? And I've always just gone by, if it sounds good, it just sounds good. So I think that's really insightful, and I appreciate you showing us your mastering process. I think we learned a few things that you wouldn't learn anywhere else on YouTube, especially with that clipping tool. I think that might be the secret sauce to getting things super loud and present and modern in today's age. So really appreciate
I mean, just
you.
clipping
Yeah.
in general is your friend, really. You know, I could do a whole hour-long talk on clipping and where to use it and give demonstrations because it's that important. I mean, EQ is an EQ, reverb's reverb, you know, but clipping is a bit overlooked. Even like a lot of the sound design I do to start off with, I do it on MacBook speakers because the transient detail on a little laptop in front of you is so much better than these speakers behind me, but they're better for obviously mixing and mastering music. But just the detail you can get from just listening to small speakers and stuff like that. There's so many errors that you make which you learn from in making music. All the mistakes add up to you becoming a better producer, whether it's sound design, mixing, or making music, you know. So you have to make these mistakes.
I think those are very wise words, and I think that's probably a good place to end off, is that you've been gracious enough to share us your personal mastering process, individual tools and VSTs you're using in your process to get things super loud and clear. I'm sure we'll get another chance to have you in the channel so we can learn more about your techniques. But for everyone out there, if you guys enjoyed what Erb N Dub has shared with us today, and if you want to support him directly, check out his VST tools, Jump Up Bass, Reese Bass, Hardware Bass, as well as his sample packs and preset packs. You can find out more down in the links below. And to end off, I just want to say thank you again, Erb N Dub, for being kind enough to share us your personal techniques and sharing us stories in your studio. And hopefully we'll have you back again soon.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, big up, man.
Cool. Take care.
And that wraps up this episode of the Producer's Corner with Erb N Dub. We covered his journey as a producer, mastering techniques, and how he developed his own line of VST plugins. If you found this useful, drop a comment, hit that like and subscribe, and let me know who else you'd like to see on the next series. And remember, check the links down below to learn more about Erb N Dub's VST tools. And if you want to support this channel directly, remember, you can check out DnBAudio.com for sample packs, preset packs, and Ableton kits to help you along your journey. You can learn more down in the links below. If you want to see me recreate drum and bass and jungle classics, check this playlist up here. And if you want to learn more about breakbeats and drum programming, check this playlist up here. Alright guys, thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay creative and peace out.